Daniel about a year ago. So I gotta be frank with you that when I was meeting with Daniel a year ago, I didn't prepare for the meeting at all. And I can't remember the premise under which Christine introduced me to Daniel. But I was pretty overwhelmed to discover what Daniel's been working on and what its success could mean for the world, globally and locally. And most especially what it could mean for the realization of some of our most cherished Rotary values. And when I met Daniel a year ago, I immediately thought of him being a great speaker at an international RI convention. And I think what he has to say to our club today in general is that valuable, and our guests from Sweden. And yet here he is today just for our club, and we get to have him all to ourselves. The Rotary Foundation helps Rotary members build understanding, goodwill, and peace by improving health, providing quality education, improving the environment, and alleviating poverty. And Daniel is proposing a view of the future that most people who encounter it report a clear sense of hope from. That it's usually followed by amazement that one individual can propose it. In some, he tells me quite a lot. In fact, it's suggested that working on this is too big, obviously, for one person. And I know he agrees with that. Daniel's all about collaboration, working with others. In fact, he now represents a growing group of people from around the world in more than 20 countries who are sharing this existential but very practical question: how can we make the world work for 100% of us? Or as he is likely to ask, is there enough? Daniel, welcome to the Rotary Club.
Thank you so much.
And yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to first of all find out if you can all hear me at the back, because if I don't have to carry a microphone, I think you're going to understand me a little bit better. Can you all hear me back there? Everybody? Anybody not? Anybody that's not going to raise their hand? Oh, that's an old joke. That's quite a question for a lunchtime conversation, wouldn't you agree? It's a big task to do in 20 minutes. And as Rick pointed out, this is really the question that has unexpectedly taken me to 30 countries around the world, beginning to have a very frank individual conversation, because that big question that was on there before is pretty massive for any one of us individually, even to begin to define. But you have 4 questions at the back there that tell me that this culture I'm only beginning to discover through Rick, and wish I'd discovered Rotarians long before. That you all understand the nature of what my friends at Group Partners would say, that when you want to solve a problem, start by looking at what question you're asking. It's not really solutions that come from answers, it comes from how we frame the argument. And this is a question that I've been, in one way or another, invested in for almost 30 years. I am a student of students of Buckminster Fuller, who invented this thing called the world game. How many have ever heard that phrase, the world game, before? Or Spaceship Earth. This is the man who coined that term, right? And the world game was decidedly in opposition to war games. We just got listening to how Sweden fought for 100 years over a tiny piece of land that I've personally visited, and heard that story from descendants of those people. 100 years to define a little piece of land that's gone back and forth between 2 tribes. I would suggest that all of us in this room, whether we admit it or not, or recognize it or not, we're all products of war, every one of us. And our conversation, as you guys well understand from the way that you ask questions, to even ask what truth is and how do we share it, things that are under attack in today's world, that the world game is what precedes a world working, in the same way that war is preceded by war games. And how we define this for ourselves is in some of our, and I'm only giving you a little bit of background here so you know where I come to this question called, is there enough, of some of our professional work, so that you don't think I'm just a philosopher up here talking about how the world can work for 100% of humanity. We're actually doing something about it. This is a press release from last week about our company, Impact Launchpad. This is the for-profit side of what I do, has introduced a technology that can eliminate landfills from the planet. How many think that's a good idea? Okay. You should know as an Al Gore trained climate reality activist that methane and landfills are now a bigger threat to us in the next 10 years than carbon dioxide ever could be or the coal industry. This is a really, really big deal. And also, we were just introduced to Christine here, just to give you a little bit of breadth of the kind of work we do. You all need to get to know Christine in this room because Christine is addressing a problem in Canadian society and global society of unpaid and unsupported caregivers in our society. How many in this room know of a caregiver or are a caregiver? Raise your hand. This woman over here, please stand up, Christine. She is doing something about what caregivers need in this world. Please give her a hand, even though you haven't heard of her before today. So this is an example of the kind of companies that we support. And we ask really big questions like this, like if the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which was developed in 2015, have set out a pathway of human survival in 17 categories, you could think of that as infrastructure, human infrastructure, just like building bridges and roads. We already know the pathway to reach those 17 sustainable goals, and we know the price tag, but that price tag has not been come up with. This is a very sobering slide, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's already baked in. We already have more refugees on this planet today than have ever existed before in history. And humanity can deal with this. We have the means to deal with this. What we don't have is the agreement to do it. How many would agree that a massive population of 1 billion people could not be supported by any one country? Right? So I don't know about you, but wherever I look in the world, government has become ever more dysfunctional. I don't care what philosophy you come from. There's a lot less getting done and a lot more war between the sides, right? We're no longer opponents, we're now enemies. This is all over the world. It's not just in Canada, the United States. And so philanthropy can't be expected to pick up that price tag, which means it's left to people like myself, who are social impact investors, for-profit and non-profit, to pick up that slack. Our investment thesis is that everything we need for humanity to thrive has already been invented. I just gave you a clue to a landfill elimination technology that nobody in here has ever heard of. And when I talk to the waste management folks, they want to make me wait 4 years to prove my technology already works. So this is the level of dysfunction that we're at. And so if you take that example I mentioned before of 1 billion people being homeless on this planet in less than 27 years, can we 3D print homes? Yes? Did you know that we can get all the water we need from the atmosphere and never have to touch the groundwater ever again and powered only by the sun? That technology is proven. If you have water derived from the sun and the atmosphere from anywhere on planet Earth, can you make food? Right? So is it possible that instead of a Manhattan Project to stop the world from going off a cliff and coming up with a bomb to threaten the other guy with, that we could get scientists and researchers together to take all these individual technologies and deploy them in a 3D printed home that can be connected to the grid, make its own food, get rid of its own waste, and be sustainable on land or water? Is that harder than making an atomic bomb? I don't think so. Wealth, we talked about money back there, or somebody saying we have to get to the reality of money. The reality we need to get to is the distinction between what money is and what wealth is. Before I mentioned the 3.5 trillion needed for the planet to survive, for humanity to survive. Is there enough wealth for that? There's more than 500 billion of wealth on this planet before we start mining the asteroids. So we don't have a lack of money, we have a lack of something else. Now I'm getting to what I'm coming to you for. All that was background. And what I'm going to invite you to do, even though we're talking about very, very big things, is in the next few minutes, I want to impart to you, not a question, but an actual conversation, just like you end up having a conversation with your 4-way test. It's my invitation to you that when you take the conversation of is there enough and put it into your business, your home, your relationships, and with yourself, a question, is there enough, could not even been asked in the 20th century, could it? Right? If you apply it to this, how many people would think this is a pretty tough question to answer? I think it is. Yeah? And I'm a climate reality activist trained by Al Gore, as I mentioned before. And when I mention this to my friends, you know, which is bigger of these, they tend to choose climate change. And then I ask them, well, do you think we can solve anything about climate change if we're not collaborating? And the question certainly gets back to what the real issue is. Humanity is not as threatened by climate change or tribalism or any social ill you want to throw at that as by our inability, because we're all products of war, and we start most of our conversation in conflict, and I can prove that in a follow-up conversation. If anybody here is moved by what it is that I'm saying, I'm going to be inviting you to do two things. There's a very specific way you can help some of the efforts that we're doing. And if you're moved enough to conduct a more in-depth conversation and invite me into your home or your office or a church basement or even over a cup of coffee with a group of people to discuss this, we're talking about something very grassroots that begins to recognize that we're not very good at agreement. If we look at ourselves as humanity, we've spent most of our time being at war with a few little glimpses of peace in between. And I don't think peace is the opposite of war. Peace is where you lay down your war until you're going to do your next conflict. Peace is a byproduct of agreement. Agreement is what we do not know how to do at a sufficient level enough for survival. And when we look at it from that point of view of challenge, I'm suggesting to you, and there are other methods besides this. We need 1,000 flowers blooming. I think your 4 questions lead into that. I think nonviolent communication is part of this conversation, all of that. But I'm going to suggest to you that we stumbled onto this question, is there enough, as a prelude to more in-depth conversation to apply to a whole bunch of other topics. And you can see evidence of this online, recorded, where when we talk about is there enough water, we bring together all the people who are making solutions of water from the atmosphere powered only by the sun. Is there enough is not just an existential question, it's a question that provokes solution thinking. And I've had it with 5-year-olds. So you can't tell me this is inaccessible to anybody from any background. And I've visited 30 countries having this conversation. And there's a way for you to appropriate our work into your business, into your family life, into the way you raise your children and grandchildren. When you pose this question to people, they become immediately responsible for the answer. It's not telling people that there's abundance. How many people have tried to tell people there's abundance and had limited success? That's me for sure. But when I asked it as a question, people began to be responsible for that answer. When people are posed this question, it's obviously conditional and situational. And there's no 2 people that have ever answered this question the same in over 4,000 hours of research. And why does it become a question of conflict and agreement? Because when I ask you, what from your perspective do we not have enough of? And whatever you answer to the not enough in this world, or there would be enough if only those guys would get out of the way, or there would be enough if so-and-so had more courage. It's usually other people, but not us, right? And wherever you answer not enough from is where your values are. So when you learn, which I'm willing to teach you in 10 minutes, how to have this conversation in a way that produces these results, whatever somebody gives you back about what they think is not enough of or what the conditions for enough would be, they've given you a window into their soul. And that becomes a basis of collaboration and agreement. Give you an example. We've brought Trump supporters together with Trump haters in the United States and made them ritually go through the conversation of, let's just agree that I'm Canadian, but we're both Americans, and then have our conversation about our differences. And then we've had people come in and have that same conversation without that question and without that recognition of that agreement that we foundationally start from, and we get very different results. What happens when people engage in this conversation? Again, I've done it with 5-year-olds. They realize that they have a worldview. Everybody has a worldview. When we talk about how to make the world work for 100% of humanity, it's really first starting from how do we make it work for your world? That's in fact what is the prelude to it working for all of us. Because we have enough water and we have enough land and we have enough food, we have enough energy. How many have heard that we're now mining energy from bacteria? It's going on in Israel. From the atmosphere, energy from bacteria, right? We don't have a problem with resources. We have a problem with each other is what I'm proposing to you. And I think there's something you and I can do about that. This is about communication. And we have a variety of ways in my 20 minutes that I can only tell you they exist and you'd have to go investigate them or talk to me after or whatever, that you can conduct this conversation over a cup of coffee, in a living room, in an office or a home or something like this. And we examine an issue, let's say like, is there enough courage? Which I think that the world could do with a little more of. And when we convene a conversation called, is there enough courage? We're not debating it. We're looking at what do we have enough of and not enough of when it comes to building more courage in the world. It's a solution type of convening as opposed to debate where you have one side and I have another side and one of us is going to win and the other is going to lose. This is very different examination. And so I don't have the opportunity of time right now, but I'll only make the assertion and I'll have to prove it to you later that the engagement of this conversation called Is There Enough is a trust machine. How many think that we could do with more trust in the world? I promise you this is an aid to that effort. If you're really committed to seeing that more trust and relationship is built in the world, this is one pathway you haven't seen. And I threw up this service above self because this is a very inaccessible type of concept to people that are not already enamored of the values of Rotary to begin with. This is sort of more of an advanced look at it from my outside look at Rotary values. But it isn't just service above self, it's also in the process of this, of being able to communicate with another from where they come from, not from where I come from, is a bridge of a different kind of service, not only above self, but even for self and for the relationship that we build together. So I encourage you to look at it from that point of view, that if I could put you into a phone booth and on the other side of that phone booth would become something more trustworthy, this is the phone booth. So what is it I'm asking of you? I'm asking you to participate in two specific ways to do a bugle call, basically, for this conversation, and nothing more than that. And one of them is an action you can take that may seem very insignificant to you, but it's as insignificant as a vote is, and as important as a vote is. And that is this. If you buy my premise, and you may not buy it right now, and you may have to have more conversation with me to really fully appreciate what it is that I'm saying, but if the opposite of war isn't peace, but agreement, maybe we need a treaty of humanity and not of nations. If all 8 billion of us signed this commitment that says simply, I'll do my best to make agreement in this life as much as I can as a personal credo, not as a treaty with everybody else in the world, but just on behalf of my generations that produced me and about the generations coming forward, can I dedicate myself to making as much agreement as possible as I can? And me asking this question, my life changed dramatically, and why I'm standing here today. And I'm suggesting to you that if the concept of a treaty of individuals, not nations, is a contribution to cultural expression of something other than war, then I would ask you to sign on to this commitment that we will release in 2024. And if you're willing to do that, this commitment that is a 1-paragraph constitution of humanity that simply says, as a best efforts, I'm going to do my best to help make the world work, not just for me, but for others, and not just for others, but for me in both of those relationships. And some people think that this second paragraph is even more important than the first one, because it's the authority that I have as a human being with human rights to express myself without the permission of a country that thinks it owns me. Because we are not the properties of our countries, right? And this is where the caste system started from. This is a real thing that's going on, and if you choose to, you can only pre-register for this, but if you choose to, from my time here in Ontario today or following with more in-depth knowledge that you want, and you sign on to this, I'm already in conversations with Malala's foundation for her to sign on to this commitment. I've already had conversations with her father and her brother. I met them at a very special event that I was invited to be a guest speaker at. And I've done some testing on this. And if anybody doesn't know Malala Yousafzai, she is the youngest winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, since we brought it up here today, in history. And we expect very much that we'll be bringing her onto this in early January, and we have these negotiations going on. It will help my case with her if I can gather more pre-registration signatures. So it might very well be that your signature, along with others that are willing to commit to this, makes a case to her. And I think you could agree, if she puts her face on this, it will be transformative and all over the world. So I'm going to end with, how can humanity win this world game? The world game of making the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest time possible through spontaneous collaboration without ecological offense or disadvantage to anyone. That's Buckminster Fuller's description. Mine is just, is there enough? And when I asked this question of how can humanity win the world game, one of Buckminster Fuller's colleagues, who's a friend of mine, saw this, and this was her answer. And you are one of those 100%. And you can make a difference in what it is that I'm doing. You don't have time to go with me in the 30 countries I'm going to in the next few years, but your voice really matters in this. So I hope that what I've said has at least given you enough interest in this to participate. And secondly, to learn how to apply this conversation. These are the two ways you can enter. I've skipped one of my own slides, but if you go to istthereenough.org/treaty, I'll make these slides available if anybody wants. And we have a survey that basically makes our argument about why this treaty is needed. And the second thing that I would invite you to is, if you think that this conversation that I'm having with you deserves more attention, please open up your home, your office, your church, or any other place and gather small or large amount of people, and we could have a little more time to actually conduct the conversation of Is There Enough, so you can experiment and play with it and adapt it and do whatever you want to do with it. We've spent many years building up a lot of intellectual property around this that we're just giving to you to use in all sorts of ways, to make more agreement in your world, not just the world. And we could all do with that. And that's everything that I had to offer to you. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope I've inspired you to participate and take some action in whatever way is appropriate to you. Thank you. I was told I should take some questions, so go ahead. Yeah, so if everybody didn't hear the question, that was, am I involved with the United Nations? And the answer is no. I've had some contact with them, and I've had some contact with the World Bank, Interdevelopment Bank of Latin America. The ambitions that I've hinted at are deeper than I've had time in this short presentation to describe. And I think what you and I should take away from you asking that question is there are thousands of social impact entrepreneurs and investors like myself who were inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals. I personally think, as the amateur anthropologist I try to be, that it is the greatest public and private partnership in human history to this point. So it's not, I don't really look at it as a property of the United Nations. I look at it as a conversation that they started, and people like me came up and said, here, let's adapt that and move it in this direction, just like I'm inviting you to adapt my conversation. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yes, sir.
What was, I think I saw a book in your stuff in your write a book and find me a
Sure. The title is The First Agreement. That book is coming in January. It will have a children's book associated with it. The name of the children's book is There Enough for Me? Okay? There's a third book besides those two, which is called The Agreement Economy, which is a chapter of the first book. I will release the first book in January to pre-orders and full sale in March with the children's book, and I'm making a decision about the second book, The Agreement Economy. Yes, go ahead. Yes, I do have more extensive presentations, including podcasts that you can find on isthereenough.org, which is our library of stuff. You'll see 2 menu items on that site. One is Dig In, which is all the research behind this, including like 40 different resources besides Buckminster Fuller's thinking that goes into this. And there's another one called Participate. And under Participate, there are all these activities that you can engage in to recreate the Is There Enough conversation for yourself, even though we'd be happy to show you and guide you through it, but you can absolutely pick it up on your own and run with it. Did that answer your question? Ma'am, did that answer your question back there? Yes? Yes? Yes, over here.
It's a practical question, actually. I'm trying to figure out how I can kind of move this question and share that with my friends and family. How can you kind of steer away this important issue of politics? The next question would be, first thing that comes to mind when I started your slides is how do we create the will to have the conversation? Come up with all these important items like education. That's a lot. So how do you start first with the first words at the table?
So I think her question is how are we going to, take this out into our communities, basically ourselves. And I'm going to suggest to you, as simple as it may feel and unsatisfying in my answer, is if you begin the process of beginning to ask people this question, even showing them the logo of Is There Enough and asking them, what do they think of that? I promise you, it will start to engender responses, some that are upset by it. The CEO of the David Suzuki Foundation was livid when he discovered that I was promoting this question. He and I are now friends. he got over that. And people sometimes have that sort of reaction. I will report to you from research that we have an unusual blend of left and right, conservative and liberal, even libertarian and outright, what's the word I'm looking for? Anarchists, peaceful anarchists who love the individual sovereignty of what we're doing. So we're really a meeting place where people of different ideas can come together. And because it has, how many would agree that being better at agreement makes you better in sales? Makes you maybe a better relationship partner, better parent, right? So this has very self-oriented incentive. It's not just about making the world work. It's about how can I make my world work, right? This is like an agreement academy. We even have a little exercise we can give you over 10 hours where you can master agreement at a level. I've mastered agreement at a level I never had before, and I've been trying to deal with it for 30 years in one way or another. But I could teach that to you and teach it to others. And how many might be interested along with her to actually dig into this a little more deeply about how to handle it, how to do it? Okay, if there's enough will of that, and maybe you might, since you asked the question, try to help organize that, I would come for hours, however long you want me, to walk you through how this is exactly done. And how do I deal with my relative who doesn't want to come to my Thanksgiving dinner anymore because of our political differences? Anybody got that question rolling around? Yeah, this applies to that. We are not political. We are very much advocacy for things like how are we going to take care of 1 billion people that are homeless? That's an advocacy, but it's not political. And Rick and I have had conversations about this because we're sort of different sides of the aisle a little bit, but we both really respect the ability to build a foundation of agreement and then proceed from there. And I'm only giving words to stuff that Rick already says. Probably to all of you already think about all the stuff I've talked about here. I've just given you a few different words. Does that answer your question? Yes.
How do you quantify the success? Like, how do you track it?
Thank you for that. The question is, how do you quantify this? How do you know that you're successful? My first quantification is if other people are replicating this conversation. That's my biggest goal. And I can measure that mathematically in a number of ways. I've tried to keep this very, very tight of these 20 minutes you've asked me for, but we've built a whole business model and an economy around this treaty, right? And so when you talk about measure, our intention with this treaty is to issue 100 million certificates. We have arguments with people all the time about whether 100 million is enough, if you can imagine that. People actually, well, 100 million, what will that do? 100 million people signing a commitment like this will probably be like 1 billion people that have had the conversation to even make that decision. So what I would measure it by is how often are the conversations taking place in various formats? And on the other side, on the business side, I look at how do we take what Christina's done, which is really remarkable. She's gathered things that nobody have ever gathered before and put it under one roof. Does anybody know that in Canada right now, 1 out of every 4 people in this country is a caregiver? It's a pretty shocking statement, right? So when I look at a project like Provide Calm, I'm saying, you know, can we measure that we've been able to help move that into the marketplace more than it was before, just like any businessman? So I measured on the business side and I measured on the community side. How many people are participating? How many conversations are taking place? What countries in the world is it being taken up in and not, and that sort of thing. And your vote, your participation so matters more than you could imagine, because when I go to Sweden next, which I've been only in from December to the end of February and had a wonderful time, and I'll be going back there, I can now say, look at all the people in Burlington that have now participated, and you can participate too. And eventually it starts to take on a cultural wave. Does that answer your question? Yeah. If there's no others, I think I'll turn the time back and thank you very much to the executive and president and Rick and Christine for having me here. And I hope I'll get to see you more while I'm here in Ontario. Thank you very much.